Hey y'all, welcome to the channel. Today we're checking out why does Russia have the best maps of Britain?
What have the Russians ever done for us?
What, apart from vodka, Tchaikovsky, the periodic table, radiators and winning World War II?
Yes.
Nothing.
Wrong. This is the story of perhaps the greatest and secretest mapping exercise ever undertaken.
Welcome to Map Men.
We're the men.
And here's the map.
Map men, map men, map men.
This is a map of the southeast of England.
They left out the last men in that one.
This is a map of the southeast of England. It's geographically recognisable, but the spelling seems a little, well, Polish. There's Istpon,
Sorfendomsje,
Hedgesteins,
Zylinem.
Tanbrides Lels.
Where did this hilarious map come from?
It was made for the use of the Polish Air Force. All the notoriously hard to pronounce English place names have been transliterated, spelt phonetically so the Polish pilots can pronounce them as Britishly as possible.
It's actually quite useful for doing the opposite of what it was meant for, teaching English speakers how to spell in Polish.
My Polish is better already.
Dobre żwonie.
Yes. It dates back to the Cold War, at a time when both sides were preparing for it to suddenly get hot.
This famously involved America and Russia massing enough nuclear warheads to destroy the entire world many times over, which at the time was considered a perfectly reasonable use of taxpayer money.
But it less famously involved the Soviet production of thousands of maps that, to this day, very few people know very little about, with even more people knowing even less.
These were part of an enormous military mapping exercise begun by Stalin and continued by a series of other, less famous but probably nicer, Russian leaders throughout the Cold War.
Hang on. Joseph Stalin, fun fact, twice nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Really? I'm going to take that as true because I usually look these things up and it's totally true. Why was he considered? Hang on, I have to look it up. He's holding a gun. A crooked gun. No, that's a pipe. He was nominated twice in 1945 and 1948 for his efforts to end World War II. I don't usually think of him as that kind of guy. I guess that's the fun fact of it. What's the next one? George Malenkov was known by the nickname Two Jags. Why? What does that mean? Nikita Khrushchev, I've heard of him. Fun fact, unsuccessfully tried to patent a self-boiling egg. How would that work? His hands were superglued together throughout the 1970s. What? I know Wikipedia is not the best thing to reference, but we're not serious journalism here. We can let some lies seep through. Finding anything about his hands being glued together, that might be a joke. Although these map men are usually really serious, like usually they put truthful things in there, but I couldn't find anything about that. I mean, I could see if he had some sort of disability that he didn't want the public to know about, that he could have super glued his hands together just to keep them like still, or to keep them like maybe he could only move one, but he didn't want it to look like that, or maybe they're pulling our leg. I don't know. Fun fact, he doesn't know who you are either. Yeah, I never heard of him. Chernenko was a huge fan of Catchphrase and had every episode on VHS. Is that a game show? Did an advert for Pizza Hut in 1998. Let's look it up. I believe that. Gorbachev was pretty, American friendly. Oh my gosh, it's the first thing that popped up. I don't want to watch the commercial. I don't want to put an ad for Pizza Hut in this video. I believe it.
These were part of an enormous military mapping exercise begun by Stalin and continued by a series of other, less famous but probably nicer, Russian leaders throughout the Cold War.
Because they're Soviet-made, you might expect these maps to be somehow laughably defective, like the ones we discussed in an episode about Soviet maps that left enormous blank spaces for places they wanted people to forget about. Don't watch it now, watch it later.
But this belies their true map-making brilliance, because as we're about to see, they were actually scarily good at it. Here's a British-made OS map of Pembroke Dock from 1953, with a conspicuous lack of detail in this flying boat base, which, by the way, should surely be called a swimming plane base.
Definitely. But the secret Soviet map of the same area from 1950 has far more detail, including buildings, dockyards, and an entire pier that the OS left out.
Even American military maps were out-accurated by the Russians. Here's the
Really?
USGS version of Hanscom Field Air Force Base, and here's the Soviet version from the same time. And in a far too easy game of spot the difference, the American map doesn't show the security fence, doesn't show this runway extension, and doesn't show this runway at all.
Where's Hanscom Field? Let's look it up. And there it is today. The Soviet version's even more accurate than Google Maps. All those buildings are still there. The runway extension looks like it's been destroyed.
And doesn't show this runway at all.
Well, that's important. Is that a runway? I don't know if that's a runway. That looks like a service road. like for trucks and stuff. Maybe luggage trucks. I could kind of see why the US map left those things off.
So how did the Russians do it?
In 1962, the Soviets got an automatic map contemporizing plugin, the Zenit satellite program.
This meant they could easily spot American runway extensions from the safety of the Earth's orbit.
But a space bird's eye view doesn't tell the whole story.
Floating away.
The Soviets would no doubt have loved to know the location of the UK's 11 bunkers for the regional seats of government in case of nuclear war, like this one in Cambridge, which from the air just looks like another boring bit of university building.
Science block, language lab, terrible improv club.
Also, spotting a long trench being dug in Teesside, the Russian cartographers guessed this to be a road under construction, when in fact they were just laying gas pipes.
Idiots.
So to help them fill in the blanks, the Soviets weren't averse to simply copying published maps that already existed. In fact, they perfected the art of copying old maps to an impressive T. Their 1990 map of Bradford includes exact spot heights that feature on 3 different editions of OS maps from 1982, 1938 and 1909.
So either the Russians just happened to survey the heights of the exact same spots, or more likely they showed a flagrant disregard for British copyright law.
Even the apparently simple art of map copying has its pitfalls, which led to some revealing mistakes.
On this map of London, Her Majesty's Theatre is labelled in the index as Residence of the Queen.
Prince Philip, I'm home!
That would be important information. That's a huge mistake. Because that's not classified information that she lives at Buckingham Palace. How could they get that wrong?
Prince Philip, I'm home!
If the Russians were going to get...
She's on the stage. I just got that. It took me a minute.
If the Russians were going to get the competitive edge they needed in the Cold War map-off, they were going to have to employ the ultimate and Cold Warriest of weapons, spies.
The rapid expansion of Russian spying under Stalin continued throughout the century until no matter where you lived in the world, you were always at least 10,000 miles from a Russian spy. Secret agents would
Wow. Wait, 10,000 miles is far.
Secret agents would go on extended foreign tours to gather intelligence.
In a bid to blend in unnoticed, a popular tactic was for agents to set up a picnic close to a construction site, giving them a chance to have a good nosy at whatever this building, road, railway or pipeline was all about.
So, to spy on a construction site, they would set up a picnic next to the construction site? That is bizarre. I guess, though, if I saw people picnicking next to a construction site, I wouldn't expect them to be Russian spies. I would just think they were weirdos. I guess that would work. These spies are risking their lives to make maps, not to look for classified documents or to assassinate people, just to make maps.
It's remarkable and terrifying how much information the Soviets were able to gather for their maps that could only have been procured through spies. They recorded the names of factories and what they produced, measured the loading capacities of bridges, and even went as far as to note the average distances between trees in woodland.
This is not what I signed up for.
Even though the Russians were mapping different cultures...
Why would you need to know how far apart the trees are? Why would that be valuable? I guess if you were planning on sending troops there, it could be useful. Or to know if your tanks could fit between the trees, maybe? Okay, now I get it.
Even though the Russians were mapping different cultures and landscapes from across the world's continents, all their maps were produced in an impressively standardized form.
There was a clear colour scheme and a list of symbols so comprehensive that officers were given a 220-page handbook to help them read the maps properly. The only reason we've begun to understand...
So the map is that big, and then the book about how to read the map is much larger. That's very funny. These guys are good.
The only reason we've begun to understand the scale of Soviet mapping at all, given these maps were,
And still are.
heavily classified, is in no small part thanks to 2 British authors.
In 2017, John Davies and Dr. Alexander Kent published The Red Atlas, How the Soviet Union Secretly Mapped the World, which we absolutely have to mention, not only because it's excellent, but also because it's the only source material available on the topic.
How John and Dr. Alex got their hands on the maps in the first place is a pretty remarkable story in its own right. After the Cold War became more of a lukewarm peace, ex-Soviet officers were ordered to ship classified material back to Moscow or have it destroyed, including thousands of secret maps.
Opportunistic map dealers spotted a chance to pick up some illicit cartography, making them available to the West for the first time. It was only when John and Dr. Alex went travelling around map shops of Eastern Europe that anybody discovered the scale of what the Soviets had achieved.
Thanks to their colossal cartographic collecting, we now know how the Soviets made their incredibly detailed maps. But the scarier thing to think about is why?
Looking at all of these maps together reveals something fascinating. They don't suggest a superpower preparing to blow the world to smithereens. Instead, the attention to detail suggests they wanted to leave it unnuked and merely invade and own this territory.
The bunny jumping with the Soviet flag is pretty funny looking. That reminds me of a movie called Red Dawn that came out in the 80s. I'm sure that's something that those spies also relayed back to Moscow, is that all the Americans have guns. Do not invade.
And merely invade and own this territory.
An invasion that would have included their Polish allies, which explains our funny phonetic Polish map.
Look at the Polish Air Force. There's a flag on the plane.
On the one hand, it's a chilling foreboding of a gruesome invasion that thankfully never took place.
On the other, it's nice to know that if the Polish troops had invaded, they'd have at least been thoughtful enough not to pronounce it Frome.
They made another video about why are English names so hard to pronounce, and that was one of them. I think it's pronounced From. No, Froome. It's pronounced Froome, right?
Frome.
That's incorrect, lady. It's Froome. Oh.
Frome.
There's a British and English pronunciation selection.
Frome.
Froome. And the American?
Frome.
So Google automatically assumes that Americans are just going to pronounce it wrong. Well, that's funny. That's probably accurate, though.
Today, the threat of conflict between East and West is within satisfactory levels.
Hang on, gotta read these. Practically embed together regular DMs. Might wave at them. Not on the Christmas card list. Nuke 'em. Nuke 'em again. So we're in the not on the Christmas card list. That's not too bad. I don't get any Christmas cards, really. So I think I'm in the orange zone with most people.
Today, the threat of conflict between East and West is within satisfactory levels. But Russian spying is nonetheless still very much a thing. There could be a Russian spy hiding in your computer right now.
It's heavily rumoured that Jay is in fact a Kremlin Twitter bot.
Koshmar!
Thankfully, the Soviet maps were never used for their intended purpose
What
of
did he say?
invading the back.
Oh, probably Mapbin. I bet that's what he's saying. Oh, he's saying nightmare. Nightmare. Okay.
Thankfully, the Soviet maps were never used for their intended purpose of invading the baddies, or as we in England call them, the goodies. But that doesn't mean they haven't been used at all.
When the US invaded Afghanistan in 2001, it was Soviet maps they turned to for help, as they included far more detail than their own versions, including, for example, the different times of year that various mountain roads were passable.
That would probably be extremely useful. Didn't Russia invade Afghanistan before the United States did? Oh yeah, 1979. And I've heard the terrain is nearly impassable. I guess that's what they mean by the roads. Yeah, it has some huge mountains. So that would be very useful. Those maps would be priceless.
The maps were also widely used by big oil companies as they explored new areas for drilling across Africa and Asia.
So perhaps there's one more thing we should add to the list of things the Russians did for us, which is something they did for them, tried desperately to conceal, but was of such high quality it escaped anyway to assist with the invasion of a sovereign nation as well as rapidly accelerating climate change.
Thanks, Russia.
You're welcome. I mean, oops.
Well, another great Mapman video. I had no idea Russians were so great at making maps. It's pretty awesome. Good for them. Thanks to all the Russian spies who put their lives in danger so we can have wonderful maps, I think. Is that something to be thankful for? I think so. I'm not sure. They're human beings too. I can be thankful for them. Thanks for all your hard work. Actually, no, that would... People died, so I don't know if... I'm conflicted. I'm torn. The Russian people are great. Anyway, thank y'all for watching. Thanks for watching, and thanks for watching. Later.